Hello and welcome to this tutorial for Unit 1 of the Level 3 Award in Education and Training. Today we're going to look at Criteria 1.2, which is summarise key aspects of legislation, regulatory requirements and codes of practice relating to your own role and responsibility. Let's have a look at legislation to begin with. It's important for you to keep up to date with all relevant legislation relating to your role as a teacher, trainer and assessor and for your particular subject. This will help ensure you are remaining current with your knowledge and practice and allow you to avoid making any mistakes in your practice that you are bound by law to avoid. Although the legislation will vary depending on the location in which you live and teach, the following examples provide a broad summary of the types of legislation that teachers are usually bound by and will need to be aware of. Please ensure that you check with your regional government to access copies of the legislation that will be relevant to you. The following are examples. The Children Act of 2004 will be applicable to you if you work with 14 to 19-year-olds, vulnerable adults or learners with special needs. The Data Protection Act of 1998 made provision for the regulation of the processing of information relating to individuals, including the obtaining, holding, use or disclosure of such information. It was amended in 2003 to include electronic data. The Equality Act of 2010 replaced all previous anti-discrimination legislation and consolidated it into one act for England, Scotland and Wales. It provides rights for people not to be directly discriminated against or harassed because they have an association with a disabled person or because they are wrongly perceived as disabled. The Freedom of Information Act in 2000 gives learners the opportunity to request to see the information public bodies hold about them. The Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974 imposes obligations on all staff within an organisation commensurate with their role and responsibilities. Risk assessments should be carried out where necessary. In the event of an accident, particularly one resulting in death or serious injury, an investigation by the Health and Safety Executive may result in the prosecution of individuals found to be negligent as well as the organisation. The Protection of Children Act in 1999 was designed to protect children. It gives responsibility to local authorities to make inquiries when anyone contacts them with concerns about child abuse. The Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act of 2006 introduced a vetting and barring scheme to make decisions about who should be barred from working with children and vulnerable adults. Assessors and teachers may need to apply to the Disclosure and Barring Service to have a criminal records check. The purpose of the DBS is to help employers prevent unsuitable people from working with children and vulnerable adults. Let's now examine regulatory requirements. Regulations are often called rules, and they specify mandatory requirements that must be met. Public bodies, corporations, agencies and organisations create regulatory requirements which must be followed if they are applicable to your job role. For example, in education, one of the regulators is Ofqual, who regulate qualifications, examinations and assessment in England. Ofqual gives formal recognition to awarding organisations and bodies that deliver and award qualifications. There will also be specific regulations which relate to your specialist subject and you will need to find out what these are. Codes of practice. Codes of practice are usually produced by organisations, associations and professional bodies. They can be mandatory or voluntary and you will need to find out which are applicable to your job role. If you belong to any professional associations, they will usually have a code of practice for you to follow. For example, the Society for Education and Training has a code of professional practice which was published in 2008. There are other professional associations which you could join, such as the Chartered Institution for Education Assessors, the Institution for Leadership and Management, and the Institution of Training and Occupational Learning. In addition, your organisation should have documented codes of practice which you will need to follow, such as the acceptable use of information and communication technology, a code of conduct, confidentiality of information, conflict of interest, disciplinary, duty of care to learners including personal development, behaviour and welfare, duty to prevent radicalisation, environmental awareness, lone working, misconduct and sustainability. Policies and procedures. There will be organisational policies and procedures to follow such as appeals, complaints, misconduct, plagiarism and risk assessments. Think of the policy as a statement of intent and the procedure as how the policy should be put into action. When you are employed, you should receive a contract of employment and an employee handbook, which should include your organisation's codes of practice. Alternatively, they might be available electronically. If you are a work-based trainer, you may have to design your training and assessment activities around companies' policies and procedures, sometimes called method statements or work instructions. These will usually have the relevant legislation, such as aspects of health and safety, built into them.